All right, so to finish up these notes, we're going to move from just graphing to solving and graphing inequalities. So I'm going to start right off with an inequality with variables on both sides. So we've reviewed solving equations. Inequalities aren't a whole lot different. The main thing you've got to be careful of is the sign, okay? That greater than sign. We've got to be conscious of that when we're solving. So to solve this inequality, we're going to want to get the variables on the same side. Now, with equations, it didn't really matter too much. Inequalities, you usually want the variable to be on the left-hand side to make that inequality easier to read. So I'm going to do that with this one just to show you what I mean. So with this inequality, I'm going to start by subtracting 9x from both sides, right? So that cancels out the 9x on the right-hand side. So my inequality then becomes negative 5x plus 5 is greater than negative 10. Okay, so then this becomes just a two-step inequality now for us to solve. For me to solve this, I'm going to subtract 5. Negative 5x is greater than negative, I had to think for a second there, negative 15. Right? Now, my last step, and this is what we've got to be careful with. I'm going to divide both sides by negative 5. And dividing both sides by a negative number causes that sign to flip, to switch from greater than to less than. So this becomes x is less than positive 3. There's my solution. I asked you to solve and graph. So based on your knowledge from that last part of the lesson, the graphing is actually, I think, the easiest part. So I'm going to graph. I'm just going to go 1, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, we're good there. I'm going to put an open circle at 3, and I'm going to shade to the left. I use my highlighter for that, different color. Shade to the left of 3. So your shading doesn't have to be pretty, but you really have to show me if you're shading left or you're shading right. So make sure you're careful of that when you're solving. So moving ahead to this guided practice, 4 and 5. So now's a good time to pause, work through them, check your answers once you're ready to move on. Okay, so guided practice number 4. Solving this inequality, I'm going to solve it just like I did at the top. I'm going to move my variables so that they're on, that the variables on the left-hand side. So that means starting by subtracting 4x from both sides, right? Just like that last example I covered. So this becomes negative 3x minus 2 is less than or equal to negative 8. And then I move on solving, my next step. Add 2 to both sides. Negative 3x is less than or equal to negative 6. Divide both sides by negative 3. We're paying attention that we divided both sides by a negative number. X is greater than or equal to positive 2. Okay? And if there's any confusion on why we flip the sign when dividing by a negative with inequalities, make sure you ask me, because I'll go more in depth into why that is the way it is. I'm strictly just giving you guys the nuts and bolts of this lesson right now. So if you want to go further in depth with that, I can definitely explain that to you a little bit further. So, graphing this, I'm just going to graph 1, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now look at this, closed circle for greater than or equal to. And then for my shading, I'm shading to the right for greater than. Okay? So again, you're picking the points. As long as you're not just plotting down just 2 and nothing else, I'm good with you just having a few numbers to the right, a few numbers to the left, just to show that greater than, less than difference, all right? Next, actually, I think I gave you a little bit simpler one for number 5, right? So that one, start off by subtracting 6. Negative 7x is greater than negative 7. Divide both sides by negative 7. X is less than positive 1. Okay? So that sign only flips when I divide or multiply both sides by a negative number. So if I multiplied or divided both sides by a positive number, that sign would stay the same. So me graphing this, let's just go -1, 0, 1, 2, 3, open circle at 1, and shading to the left. Okay, shading to the left of 1 since it's less than. So that's solving just regular flat out inequalities. One variable is all we're going to cover right now. Next, we're going to move on to some compound inequalities. So those are important to kind of pay attention and go through slowly because these are where there's a little more room for mistakes. So first type of inequality for compound inequalities we are going to solve is an AND inequality. And I feel like this is the tougher of the two to solve. So with an AND inequality, you're looking at it, there's two inequality symbols, there's two inequalities we can write and solve. So the first inequality I'm going to write and solve is -7 is less than 5x minus 2. And for right now, I'm just going to ignore the less than or equal to 8. That is a separate inequality we are going to solve. So, solving this inequality first. I'm going to leave everything the same, but I'm going to just solve for x. And I'm going to show you a trick at the end. I'm going to add 2 to both sides. -5 is less than 5x. Divide by 5. Now, in this case, I'm dividing both sides by +5. That means that my sign, -1, my sign stays the same. All right, that's important. That is important. So I'm just going to leave that inequality as is right now, and I'll explain that towards the end. So -1 is less than x. That's part of my compound inequality to solve. The other part, the other inequality to solve. 5x minus 2, less than or equal to 8. So, just ignoring the -7 is less than part, solving this inequality. Same steps, add 2 to both sides. 5x is less than or equal to 10. Divide by 5, divided by a positive, sign stays the same. X is less than or equal to 2. So, the big idea here. Two inequalities here. If I start with an AND inequality, I end with an AND inequality. So I just want to quick show you guys how I'm going to write these as a single AND inequality. Pretty straightforward. -1 is less than x, and x is less than or equal to +2. So that's why I talked about how to graph these before, because we're graphing them now after we solve them. So that means open circle at -1, closed circle at +2. It is an AND inequality, so I'm going to shade to the middle. Okay, shade inside of both of those. So that's solving an AND inequality. Example 5. Or inequalities. Or inequalities is easier to see the difference of the two. So these essentially you just solve each of these separately and then graph them mainly separately, and then you've got your graph for that inequality. So I'm just going to solve. 4x minus 7 is less than or equal to 5. I'm going to add 7 to both sides. 4x, forgot x. 4x is less than or equal to 12. Divide both sides by 4. X is less than or equal to 3. So I'm going to hold off on graphing the whole thing until the end, but that's how I solved that first one, just solving it on its own. Next one, 3x plus 2 is greater than or equal to 23. Subtract 2. 3x is greater than or equal to 21. Divide both sides by 3. That's supposed to be a 3. X is greater than or equal to 7. So, got to graph each of these, but just remember that it's an OR inequality. So I'm going to go 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Let's see. All right? So close circles both at 3 and at 7. And since this is OR, I'm going to shade to the left of 3 and to the right of 7. So generally with OR inequalities, you shade to the left of one side, to the right of the other side. So those are some examples of how to solve and graph compound inequalities. So for this guided practice, again, pause, try it, and then check your answers. So what I'm going to do right now is I am going to pause my recording. I am going to solve these, and I'm just going to show you the answers. So pause. When you're ready, start it back up again, and you'll see the answers, okay? So I'm going to pause. Okay, so here you see my worked out answers, my solutions. Take a look over them. I'm going to explain through them very quickly, and then I'll let you guys move on. But in the first one, it's an AND inequality. I broke them apart, solved each of them separately, and then pieced them back together to put that final inequality in there. So just noticing they're both open circles. The last guided practice, number 7, OR inequality. Easier to separate, easier to graph in my opinion, but just make sure you're paying attention to those symbols so that you're not mixing things up. So solving inequalities can get tricky if you're not careful. So try to use your time wisely, try to use your space wisely, more importantly, because I'm trying to give you guys space to do the work. If the notes don't give you enough of that space, I will try and space them out a little bit more, but I'm trying to conserve paper and all that stuff. So just make sure you're doing your best to show as much work as you can, you're asking questions, and you're only moving on after you've completed that last step. That is the most important part. So move on to the next part of this lesson, and good luck on the practice and the checkpoints. Make sure you're asking for help.